Hi there. I'm just a little cat trying to reach my first 1,000 subscribers. It's free. Just click subscribe right under this video. It would mean the world to me.
When my mom told me the birthday dinner was only for real family members, I laughed out loud. Not because I thought it was funny, but because I was the reason half the people at that table were still breathing and not buried under a mountain of unpaid medical debt. The kind of laugh I let out wasn't joyful or confused. It was the kind of dry, choking laugh that gets stuck in your throat and turns into something bitter. I was standing in my kitchen, halfway through making chicken salad, phone pressed between my shoulder and ear, when she said it. I froze with a spoon in my hand, mayonnaise dripping onto the counter, as my mom's voice, cool and casual as always, dismissed me like a telemarketer. It was just a small thing, she added. Nothing fancy, just close family. That phrase, close family, stuck to my ribs like spoiled food. I didn't even hang up properly. I just set the phone down and stood there, surrounded by the familiar hum of my fridge and the smell of overcooked chicken, while my stomach twisted into a knot so tight it made me nauseous. I opened my phone and scrolled through Facebook. Sure enough, there it was. A bright, smiling group photo taken at Luciana's Steakhouse, that swanky place downtown where the bread rolls are warm, the wine glasses clink, and everything smells like success. My sister Karen was there, propped up like she wasn't the same person who needed help getting out of bed last month. Mom was there, next to Uncle Mike and his loud Hawaiian shirt. Even cousins I hadn't seen since high school were sitting around that long table, posing with Grandma June, who looked dazed but happy, wearing a glittery tiara like a queen who'd been told to smile for the camera. And me, I was nowhere. No invite, no text. Not even a passive-aggressive wish you could have made it afterward. Just silence. I kept staring at that photo, zooming in like I might find myself hiding in the background, a ghost clinging to the edges of a family that never really felt like mine. I thought about every time I picked up the phone at midnight to hear Karen sobbing, too scared to go to the ER alone. I thought about the stack of medical bills I'd kept in a filing cabinet in my home office, a monument to my role as the unofficial family insurer. I remembered the time she said, "You're the only one I can count on," as I transferred over $800 to cover her out-of-pocket costs for her new specialist. I remembered skipping vacations and delaying car repairs because Karen's prescription refills weren't covered by her state insurance. That night, after pouring myself a glass of cheap red wine and throwing out the untouched chicken salad, I opened my laptop and logged into my payment dashboard. It took a few minutes to load. My internet's been dragging lately, but when it did, I scrolled down to the line item that read Karen Autopay, monthly medication coverage. The date of the next withdrawal was tomorrow. I hovered over the cancel button, my cursor trembling just slightly. It wasn't rage fueling me. It wasn't spite either. It was something colder, clarity. For the first time in a long while, I saw the entire picture with brutal honesty. I wasn't family to them. I was an ATM with a smile, a convenient ghost who kept the lights on and the pills flowing, but didn't need to be fed or invited or acknowledged. I clicked cancel. There was no dramatic sound, no pop-up window asking if I was sure. Just a quiet change in the status. Autopay canceled. I leaned back in my chair, sipping the wine like it might drown the sharp sting of my own boldness. The silence that followed wasn't comforting, but it wasn't crushing either. It was new, heavy, sure, but mine. For the next few days, nothing happened. I went to work like normal, sat through staff meetings where nobody knew that I had just severed the most critical financial lifeline my sister had. I went for walks, read a book, ate microwave dinners while reruns of game shows played in the background. Then 4 days later, the calls started. First, a missed call at 9:15 in the morning, then 3 more by noon, then a voicemail. I didn't even listen to it, just stared at the transcription on my phone screen. "Jenna, something's wrong. I think my payment didn't go through. Can you check?" I set the phone down and walked away. By dinner time, there were 10 missed calls. I didn't sleep that night, not really. I lay in bed with the lights off, phone face down on the nightstand, heart pounding like I'd just committed a crime. Maybe I had. Maybe what I did was cruel. But here's the thing no one wants to admit. Being cruel sometimes feels exactly like being free. When I got up the next morning, the wine glass was still in the sink. Lipstick smudged on the rim like a signature. The fridge was humming. Outside, birds chirped like it was any other Saturday. But it wasn't. And that's when I knew. This wasn't the end of a bad moment. It was the beginning of something bigger. A long overdue reckoning I never saw coming. The next voicemail came in just as I was brushing my teeth. This time, it wasn't Karen. It was my mom. And her voice didn't sound nearly as casual anymore. The first few voicemails were surprisingly polite, laced with that soft kind of desperation people use when they're still hoping a problem might solve itself if they just stay calm and pretend nothing serious is happening. Karen's voice, shaky but measured, filtered through the little speaker of my phone while I made coffee one morning, as if the steam rising from the mug could somehow distract me from the growing knot in my stomach. "Hey, Jenna," she said in the first one, her tone almost light. "So I think something went wrong with the payment. The pharmacy said my card got declined, which is weird, right? Can you check on that when you get a minute?" I didn't answer. I finished my coffee, wiped down the counter, and went about my day like I hadn't just taken a wrecking ball to the fragile scaffolding my sister's life was built on. The second message came the next afternoon, shorter, more frantic. "I need you to call me back, okay? It's not a glitch. I need those meds, Jenna." By the third day, the voicemails weren't even coherent. Just heavy breathing, a choked sob, and something like "please" repeated over and over until the message cut off. I listened to that one 3 times, not because I was feeling sadistic or cruel, but because I needed to remind myself of what that sound really meant. It wasn't just panic. It was fear. Fear that the safety net she had leaned on for over a decade had suddenly vanished. And the worst part was that she didn't even know why. And still, I didn't answer, I didn't text, I didn't call, I didn't explain. I just let the silence stretch wider with each passing hour, like a canyon slowly forming between us, deepening with every ignored message and every skipped call. It wasn't that I didn't feel anything. Quite the opposite. I felt everything, all at once. The guilt, the anger, the grief of a sisterhood that had always been a little bit one-sided, like a swing with only one person pushing. I kept going back to that photo from the birthday dinner, her laughing, wine glass in hand, wearing that ridiculous sequined cardigan she swore she only wore for special occasions. And right next to her, our mother tilting her head toward Karen, like she was the only person in the world who mattered. They both looked so relaxed, so casual, so damn comfortable in a world where I apparently didn't exist. It wasn't just the dinner that cut me. It was the realization that they had never considered me essential. I was useful, sure. I was the fixer, the doer, the responsible one, but not essential. Not someone you'd save a seat for or send a last-minute text just to make sure you weren't forgotten. They never noticed the weight I carried, the sacrifices I made, or the quiet way I rearranged my life to cover for everyone else's mess. I was invisible when it mattered and indispensable when it didn't. A week after I canceled the autopay, my mom left a message. Her voice was sharp, clipped, like she had tried to hold back her irritation but gave up halfway through. "I don't know what you did, but your sister's in real trouble. She needs her medication. If you're punishing her for something, you need to stop. Now." That was the moment. I realized she had no idea about the birthday dinner photo. She didn't know I'd seen it. She didn't know I was aware of the exclusion. She thought I had just, snapped maybe? Lost my mind? Got tired of being nice? The idea that she couldn't even guess why I stopped helping stung more than I expected. And that's when something inside me shifted. Not a snap, not a breakdown, more like the slow creaking hinge of a door that had been stuck shut for years. I realized they had no concept of my boundaries because I had never enforced any. I had handed them the keys to my life and told them to come and go as they pleased. And now that I had changed the locks, They were banging on the door like I was the one being unreasonable. I started noticing little things, like how much quieter my apartment felt without the constant ding of notifications, or how I slept a little deeper, longer, now that I wasn't dreading that next emergency call. There was still tension, of course, still guilt humming beneath the surface, but there was also something that felt suspiciously like peace. And for the first time in years, I wasn't broke at the end of the month. I wasn't scrounging for deals or counting pennies. I bought myself a pair of decent walking shoes and took the long route home from work just because I could. No pressure, no obligations, just the sound of my own footsteps and the realization that I had options. Still, the calls kept coming. Karen started texting instead of calling. "Jenna, please, just tell me what's going on. I don't understand. Did I do something? Please, I'm scared." And then finally, "If you don't help me, I might die. Is that what you want?" That one stayed unread on my screen for 2 full days before I deleted it. And then on the 10th day, the tone changed. There was no longer desperation in the messages, just silence. But that silence didn't last long, because the next knock on my door didn't come from a phone. It came from my sister, in person. She didn't knock like someone hoping to talk. She knocked like someone demanding to be heard, like someone who felt entitled to answers and had come to collect them with the full weight of a decade's worth of dependence behind her. I was halfway through watering my succulents, the only living things in my apartment that didn't ask for too much and gave me green in return, when I heard it, 3 hard pounds against the door, not frantic but firm, deliberate. The sound of someone who was not going to walk away quietly. I didn't open the door right away. I stood in the kitchen for a full minute, the watering can still in my hand, watching the water slowly seep into the dirt around a plant I'd named Marlene. Because naming things gave me a sense of control, when my actual life felt like a long list of things done for others. I breathed in, slow and deep, grounding myself before I turned the knob and pulled open the door to see Karen standing there, shoulders slumped forward, eyes puffy and red, her jacket zipped all the way up despite the late spring warmth. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, voice cracking but eyes sharp, the edge of panic not yet dulled by exhaustion. "I've been calling you, Jenna. I need my meds. I could die without them, you know that." And there it was, that line, the one she always threw out when the emotional manipulation needed to go from mild to catastrophic. The line that made her feel justified in asking for anything. The line that had kept me chained to the role of caretaker, long after I'd stopped feeling like a sister and started feeling like a full-time nurse with no clock out. I opened the door wider but didn't invite her in. She stepped across the threshold anyway, her movements practiced, like muscle memory. She knew this place, had cried on that couch, rifled through that fridge, used that bathroom to wipe her tears and reapply her makeup when life came at her harder than expected. She walked in like she still had a right to. "You want to talk?" I asked, closing the door behind her. "Fine, let's talk." She turned to face me, and for the first time in years, I saw something other than panic in her expression. I saw confusion, hurt, maybe even a sliver of guilt. But it was buried under years of being told, by me, by mom, by circumstance, that she didn't have to carry her own weight. "I just don't understand," she said again, softer now. "You've always helped me." And she was right. I had. I had always been there, always answered, always sent the money, covered the bill, made the call. I had skipped out on my own vacations, stayed late at work, borrowed from my own future just to make sure she stayed upright. And not once had she ever asked what that cost me. So I told her. I sat her down and told her everything, every dollar, every copay, every skipped weekend away with friends because I was worried something might happen while I was gone. I told her about the time I cried in the car after wiring her rent money because I couldn't afford both that and a new set of tires. I told her about the nights I lay awake thinking about what would happen if I got sick or injured, who would help me if I needed anything, and always came up empty. She listened at first, her eyes filled with tears, And for a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, this was going to be the conversation that turned something inside her. But then she said something that shattered whatever fragile understanding had started to form. But I didn't ask you to do all of that. And there it was, the out. The escape hatch she always used when faced with the weight of her own reliance. It was true in a way. She hadn't always asked. Sometimes I had volunteered, stepped in, offered without being prompted, but that didn't make it any less real. That didn't erase the fact that she had built her survival around the assumption that I would never say no. You didn't have to ask, I replied, my voice low but steady. You never had to ask because I trained you not to. I made it easy, I made it seamless. I made sure you never had to look down and see the net because I never let you fall. She went quiet after that, her fingers fidgeting with the zipper on her jacket, her jaw tight, eyes locked on the floor. I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. Not guilt, not empathy, but logistics. How would she replace me? Who could she turn to next? Could she afford to be angry, or did she still need me badly enough to pretend she wasn't? I didn't ask her to leave. I didn't have to. After a few minutes of silence, she stood up, pulled her jacket tighter around herself like armor, and walked to the door without saying another word. She paused before opening it, her hand on the knob, and for a split second I thought she might turn around, say something meaningful or honest or even just kind. But she didn't. She just walked out. That night, I poured a glass of whiskey and sat at my kitchen table, staring at the drawer where I kept the financial documents. The drawer with every receipt, every payment confirmation, every miserable dollar I had spent out of obligation. I pulled out the folder marked Emergency Fund. The joint account Karen didn't know I still monitored. The one I had created years ago when she first got sick, and I thought maybe I could help her build a future. It was still funded, still active, still mine. And right then something clicked. I picked up the phone and called my bank. I froze the account. It wasn't revenge, it was protection. For once, I was choosing to protect someone, me. It had been 5 days since she left my apartment without another word, 5 long, strangely quiet days where her absence rang louder than all the voicemails she had left behind. And during that time, I discovered something that I hadn't known I'd been craving for years. Stillness, a peace that wasn't dependent on someone else's need for me to constantly rescue them, a type of emotional silence I hadn't known existed until the screaming subsided and I could finally hear myself think again. But just as I was starting to believe that the worst had passed and that maybe, just maybe, I had finally drawn a line my family wouldn't dare to cross, it happened. My phone rang again, and this time it wasn't Karen's number or even Mom's. It was an unknown number, one I didn't recognize, but my gut clenched before I even answered it. The voice on the other end wasn't aggressive or hostile. It was polite, professional, measured, the kind of tone that comes wrapped in legal disclaimers and threats dressed up in niceties. A woman, an assistant from a small law office 2 towns over, introduced herself and said she was calling on behalf of Karen. She asked, ever so gently, if I would be available to discuss the financial misunderstanding between us. And I had to sit down, slowly and deliberately, because my knees actually went weak with the weight of what I'd just heard. A financial misunderstanding. That's what they were calling it now. I told her there was no misunderstanding, thanked her for the call, and hung up without waiting for a response. My hands were shaking as I set the phone down, and I just sat there, motionless, staring at the grain in my kitchen table, wondering how many layers of betrayal it took before someone just became numb to it all. I had expected fallout, maybe a public argument, maybe a few months of silence, but not this. Not a formal attempt to claw back what they thought they were entitled to, as though all the years of quiet sacrifice were just another unpaid invoice in their family ledger. 2 days later, the paperwork arrived. Plain manila envelope, couriered to my door like I was some kind of defendant in a corporate scandal. Inside was a notice, typed and sanitized, claiming that the emergency fund had been established under mutual family trust, and that my sudden and unexplained seizure of those funds had caused emotional and financial distress to Karen. My name was spelled correctly, which I found both insulting and ironic. They hadn't cared enough to invite me to dinner, but they sure cared enough to spell my name right on a legal notice. I called my own lawyer that afternoon. His name was Dan, a man I'd known casually through a coworker, someone with kind eyes and a voice like gravel who never used more words than necessary. I brought him the folder, yes, the same folder where I had stashed every scrap of evidence over the years, every bank transfer, every pharmacy receipt, every time-stamped email where Karen thanked me, or more often, just assumed the funds would be there. Dan read through it all, silent for almost an hour, and when he finally looked up, he said the most satisfying sentence I'd heard in months. "You've got them nailed to the wall." We filed a response, along with a counterclaim, defamation, emotional distress, misrepresentation of financial agreements. It wasn't even about the money anymore. It was about the principle. It was about the years I had swallowed my pride and smiled through gritted teeth while being treated like an outsider at every family gathering, about the 1,000 little ways they had taken and taken, without ever pausing to consider how it felt to give so endlessly without reciprocation. Of course, they backed down. They didn't even put up a fight. Within a week, I got a terse email from the same legal office, saying the claim had been withdrawn and that further communication would not be necessary. No apology, no explanation, just a quiet retreat like burglars who realize, halfway through a break-in, that someone's still home with the lights on. I thought that would be the end of it. I really did. But life has a way of writing its final chapters with more subtlety than we expect. About a week later, a small envelope arrived in the mail, handwritten. No return address, just my name in a slightly shaky script that took me a moment to recognize. Grandma June. Inside was a folded piece of cream stationery, the kind she always used when sending thank you notes for Christmas gifts or birthday cards. And on it, written in pen that had slightly bled into the paper, were just a few lines. "Dear Jenna," it read, "thank you for the birthday gift. They said it came from you. The food here's better now, and I got a new pair of slippers. I think of you every day. Love, Grandma." And just like that, everything made sense. She hadn't known. She hadn't even been told about the dinner. They hadn't brought her to that steakhouse, or fed her lobster, or raised a glass to her. They had taken that money, my money, and thrown a party for themselves, used her name to justify excluding me, and never once included the one person the celebration was supposedly for. And yet I had wired money directly to her nursing home a week before the birthday, asking only that they use it to improve her care and get her something she'd enjoy. It was something I'd done without fanfare, without credit, and certainly without needing to be thanked. And somehow, she still knew. Somehow, through the noise and the lies and the games everyone else was playing, she still saw me. And in that tiny handwritten note, I realized what the past 20 years of sacrifice had been building toward. Not validation, not reconciliation, but something far more powerful. Recognition. From the one person who still mattered. So when my phone buzzed the next morning with a new message from Karen, I didn't flinch. I didn't even open it. Because for the first time in my life, I no longer needed to be seen by them. I had finally been seen by her. The silence that followed wasn't empty, and it wasn't peaceful either, not at first anyway, because for a while, it carried weight. The kind of weight that fills the room like humidity after a thunderstorm, thick and invisible and suffocating, a silence that didn't just sit there politely, but expanded slowly, reminding me with every tick of the clock that something had shifted permanently, something deep and unspoken, something that couldn't be undone with a phone call or a hasty apology, assuming one ever came at all. But in that silence, there was also clarity, a clarity I hadn't expected, and it crept in slowly like light through the cracks of a closed door, reshaping the contours of what I had thought was family, and what I now recognized as something more akin to obligation wearing a friendly face. Karen didn't call again, not after the message I ignored, Not after the legal stunt backfired, and not even after Grandma's letter confirmed what I had already suspected, that the birthday dinner had never really been about Grandma, not in any meaningful way, and certainly not in the way that would have justified excluding me with the cold efficiency of someone cutting dead weight from a team. It wasn't just a party, it was a declaration, a rewriting of the family narrative that deliberately omitted the person who had been holding the story together with invisible threads. And in the wake of that realization, I found myself reevaluating every moment I had once labeled as normal. I thought about Christmas mornings where I showed up with gifts for everyone and left with barely a thank you, about hospital visits where I sat alone in waiting rooms while the rest of the family huddled around Karen, whispering about how strong she was while I negotiated insurance claims and asked nurses the hard questions no one else wanted to ask. I remembered birthdays where my name was left off group cards, vacations I wasn't invited to because I was too busy, and phone calls that only came when someone needed something, never when they just wanted to talk. These weren't isolated incidents. They were patterns, and once I saw the pattern, I couldn't unsee it. And with that realization came the final phase of something I hadn't dared to call healing. Because healing suggests a return to something whole, and I didn't want to go back. I wanted to build something new, something that didn't involve bending over backward to be loved by people who only knew how to take. So I started saying no, not just to them, but to everything that resembled them. The coworkers who dumped tasks on my desk last minute, the acquaintances who only texted when they needed a ride or a favor, the neighbors who treated kindness like a currency to be spent when convenient. I stopped playing the role of the fixer, the pleaser, the one who always showed up with solutions and left with nothing but exhaustion. And then something strange happened. The silence, the heavy, loaded silence that had once felt so loud, it changed. It got lighter, softer. It stopped being about what was missing and started being about what I was reclaiming. I began to notice things I hadn't paid attention to in years. The way my coffee tasted when I wasn't drinking it while multitasking. The way my apartment felt when it was truly my own space, not just a crash pad between crises. I started waking up without dread, going to sleep without lists running through my head, and laughing, genuinely laughing, at things that weren't funny out of obligation, but actually made me feel joy. It wasn't all clean breaks and empowerment montages, though. There were moments still where guilt crept in like a thief in the night, whispering that I had gone too far, that I should have called back, that maybe I really was cruel for pulling the rug out from under someone who had built their life on the soft cushion of my support. But those moments faded faster now, drowned out by the reality of everything I had endured and the quiet conviction that I had finally done what needed to be done, not out of malice, but out of necessity. Then one morning, as I was watering my plants and humming along to a song I hadn't heard since college, a letter arrived in the mail. No handwriting this time, no personal note, just a formal envelope, neatly addressed, from the nursing home where Grandma June lived. Inside was a brief statement confirming receipt of the funds I had wired weeks ago, followed by a short, typed update about her care. They wrote that she was doing better, eating more, that her slippers had become something of a talking point among the staff because she insisted on showing them off during physical therapy. And there was a line that stood out, not because it was sentimental, but because it was so matter-of-fact. Ms. June has referenced you multiple times during her sessions as a source of support and comfort, not as a financial benefactor, not as someone who just paid the bills, as comfort. And in that moment, I realized I had accomplished the only thing that truly mattered. I had made a difference where it counted, not in the eyes of those who demanded more than they ever gave, but in the life of someone who saw me clearly, someone who knew. Love wasn't always loud or visible or dressed up in matching family outfits at steakhouse dinners. Sometimes, love was a wire transfer with no explanation. A pair of slippers, a meal that didn't taste like cardboard. The calls from Karen never resumed. The texts dried up. My mother, after a brief round of vague threats and cold silences, stopped reaching out altogether. I became, in the span of a month, exactly what they had accused me of being when they didn't invite me to dinner. Someone outside The family, someone removed, someone separate. But what they didn't understand was that in making me an outsider, they gave me a freedom I had never known within those walls. They gave me permission to stop carrying the burden of being the responsible one, the reliable one, the good sister. And in walking away, I didn't lose a family, I shed a lie. Because in the end, blood may be thicker than water, but silence, when chosen, when earned, when finally claimed, it is deeper, it is stronger, and sometimes it is the only kind of peace left worth holding on to.